I started my technology career in the financial. I come from a very small place in India, Karachi.
Which city is that nearest to for those who don't know?
Which city? I would say many would have heard about Tata Nagar or Jamshedpur for the reasons of Tata. That's pretty close to where I spent my time. That was my accidental encounter with telecoms.
But after doing that for about 6 years, I merged two Philips subsidiaries together.
The thing that I was going to mention here is there is an element of privacy and extreme security here as well.
Welcome to this edition of Tech Tuesdays podcast. This is the first in a series, and I'm very pleased to be here today with Gautam. Want to introduce yourself, Gautam?
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here in the first podcast. And Mike, being a good friend, known him for very long. We have been in panels. Really excited to talk about various things, isn't it, Mike?
Well, shall we talk a little bit about our careers first, so that the audience have got some background to where we're coming from? Where did you start in technology? What was your background?
Yeah, of course, it was a while back. I started my technology career in the financial world, actually. Interestingly, I have spent, more than 26 years in telecoms, but I started in the financial world, and I come from a very small place in India called Ranchi, which no one really knew before. A cricket star called Dhoni came from that place. Before that, I had to explain where exactly it is. Now, all I need to say is, hey, this is the place of Dhoni. Anyways.
Which city is that nearest to, for those who don't know?
Which city? I would say many would have heard about Tata Nagar or Jamshedpur for the reasons of Tata. That's pretty close to where I spent my time. And where I spent my childhood time, I would say. But anyway, so then as I was saying, when I did my, master's in computers application. Actually, I did physics and quantum mechanics as well in graduation, but then ended up as it was happening in our generation in India, the only career that you could have is computers, and it was the time of Y2K, year 2000. We all were trying to solve a problem. It was not really a problem. You never know. So that's what I was doing in the financial world, but the clock, changed. Satellites didn't fall. Banks worked fine. Then I needed to do something else, so I then moved I was doing this thing in Sydney. From Sydney, I then moved to UK for 3 months, actually. There was some digital transformation thing happening. That was in 2000. Happening in Vodafone. I came here for 3 months because I wanted to go to US for some other stuff. But then, that was my accidental encounter with telecoms, and loved it so much, never left. And loved UK so much, never left. I came here for 3 months, and then here I am. So what about you, Mike? Can you share some, of your initial days?
Well, first of all, I'm much older than you, so my original degree was economics and maths, and after studying for that degree, I continued into the world of electronics with Philips Industries.
Oh.
And I worked with Philips and Philips Electronics. I then was asked to run Philips traffic systems, so dealing with big transport projects, the early stages of intelligent transport systems for motorways and also for rail services. That did include things like traffic lights, but big traffic systems for big motorways and big railway systems. But after doing that for about 6 years, I merged two Philips subsidiaries together and was given the chance to move into telecoms. So a bit like you, I pivoted from electronics and, dare I say, transport into telecoms. I did 2 years involved with the payphone business. one of the things that the payphone business taught me, a company called AGI, was how important it was to think about the system of payphones. How do they work with the telecoms networks? But one of the things they asked me to do was to see how could payphones develop further. So they sent me to the USA for about 2 months to study the US payphone market. And one of the things I stumbled across in the early 1980s was the mobile phone trials in the 1980s. And clearly, having had great progress with those trials and progress, I came back to the UK to say, I think these mobile phones could compete with payphones. I think we need to do some work on mobile phones. The relatively conservative AGI felt that they should concentrate on payphone systems and not mobile phones. So I found my way into British Telecom in 1983 and got involved with some of the procurement of research, some of the procurement of the early mobile phone systems. And that got me full time into the mobile industry back in 1987. So I did 30 years in the mobile telephony business for BT, its subsidiaries, but also the new brands such as Cellnet and O2, and then eventually Telefonica, which had bought out the O2 businesses and still run with partners the O2 businesses in Europe, and in partnership with Virgin Media now run the UK business. But 30 years in mobile. During that period, 1995, 1996, I was elected chairman of the GSM Mobile Operators Association that represents virtually all the licensed operators in the world. And I was then on its board for another 7 or 8 years. So I was very active in the growth of the mobile industry, both in the UK, Germany, but also across the world through the GSM Association. There were certain initiatives at the time that we put in place to help grow the industry from its GSM 2G base. So I was involved with some export missions to Asia and also to North America and to parts of Africa. One of the things I did when I was chairman was I also set up the Indian Interest Group for mobile operators in 1996. Subsequently, that became not just an Indian interest group within the GSM Association, but it was the foundation and background to TV Ramachandran's great work in setting up COAI, the Cellular Operators Association of India. I also, before that, had been appointed chairman of the UK Mobile Data Association, and I did that for 10 years as well. And for that, we put in place messaging, SMS messaging, so you could send a message from one network to another, but also on the back of that, build in games and ringtones and other messaging services. We promoted back then in the late 1990s, mobile email, mobile internet, on the growth of which we've seen huge success over many years. I also did, and this was perhaps in around 1989, 1990, did my first trip to India. So 35 years ago, did some training of some of the original mobile operators in India, some 35 years ago. And I spent a whole month there just doing that. And that was just amazing to see a different approach to how mobile was used in India, often ahead of fixed line, often ahead of internet thinking. But the foundations we can see today, even if the names have changed, we can see lots of experience that goes back to the 1990s and see new names and new players innovating in all sorts of different ways. But after 30 years in mobile, in 2017, I retired. I was appointed chief scientist in the UK government. So I was chief scientific advisor for the Department of Business and Trade. And that also used my network of contacts, and digital contacts in particular, to help with inbound investment and exports from the UK, but also international collaboration with the UK. And so my love of India has continued. I will be going to India in October 2025, very soon. And that's for India Mobile Congress. So my love of international collaboration has continued. from those early days in GSM.
That's amazing. You use some of the words, I'm sure there will be some of the audiences will be thinking slightly differently because they are overloaded terms. AGI. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about when we talk about, because, now any of the kid, if they hear AGI, they will be thinking on artificial general intelligence,
sure.
right? And also you mentioned GSMA because that's where probably my career, intersects with, although, I never had the kind of fortune to work when you were in GSMA. So I didn't mention what I'm doing right now. Maybe I'll just mention it, and then I'll not fill the gap between when I said I accidentally turned up in telecoms into what I'm doing now, right? Because that maybe we can have some discussions in there. So as the co-founder and CTO for Security, where we were actually, based on my telecom experience, even if it was accidental, I was utilizing mobile operators, data and assets, which is amazing, as you mentioned as well, Mike, to solve what I call is the severe identity crisis of the internet, right? We'll talk about that a bit later. And then now we are being acquired by XConnect, which is part of Somos Group. It's a US-based company. So now I'm settling down in there, right? So I'm not the CTO anymore. I'm the Chief Product and Innovation Officer. Yeah. So maybe we can talk a bit. And I did mention about that in one of your place that where you work, where it has made significant impact in not just in the telecom space, but also I would say society in general, because mobile phone, we can't even imagine the current society without mobile phones, right? There is even a name for the fear of losing that interesting device. They call it nomophobia, right? Because apparently we can't live that device more than a meter away or a feet away. I don't remember. Anyways, and GSMA played a significant role in there, right? Where you spend significant amount of time. And then also, I actually worked for GSMA after Vodafone, and that was an interesting journey. We can talk about that later. And then I spent 8.5 years before founding Security. So, Mike, what should we talk about then? There is a lot of kind of synergies, it sounds like, in your career from accidentally ending up. You used the word pivoted, which is really polite way of saying. I said accidentally turned up. Maybe there is some sort of negative annotation there, but anyway, so telecoms, and then you mentioned India as well, because in India and telecoms is not just from scale perspective, from, as you said, many of the, let's say, citizens there, they experience the digital world only through these little devices, right? For them, that's what the digital world is. That's why it's very different. For us, we have these multiple, let's say, entry points, right? We started with PCs. I started with AS400, but with PCs, then laptops, then phones, and then we juggle between them. But in India, it's very different. So what should we then discuss, Mike?
So I think you talk about PCs. Certainly when I was at school, my maths was often using a slide rule because calculators were not widely accepted in the classroom. And when we look today about the use of mobile phones, are they allowed in the classroom? Are they allowed in the school? What can they be used for? The devices themselves that we use, the customer equipment, has changed radically since the early years. So, one of the things I remember doing at GSM Association was something called a Mobile Data Initiative in 1996. And that was to help move from a voice world to a data world. But one of the things I wanted to do was to make sure messaging worked for everybody. I also wanted to make sure that mobile email worked for everybody and mobile internet worked for everybody. One of the joys we had was the ability to look at volumes of devices to try and bring down the cost of devices. And we may need to do more of that going forward. But we did some significant things in the mid-1990s to bring down the cost of mobile phones for everybody, to make it as inclusive and as rich a service as possible. We also looked at issues like the mobile camera phone. Now, that's a bit more recent. It really is 25 years old in 2024. So it's only 25 years old pretty well today. And as soon as you started to talk about putting a camera inside a mobile phone, that made people think about imagery, not just to help with the display, but sending pictures to people. Now, the technologists would talk about MMS, multimedia services, but actually the camera phone itself opened up many new markets. We would not have social media today without camera phones.
Absolutely.
So the impact of mobile has actually opened up many, many, many markets. The messaging market, the mobile email market, the mobile internet markets, social media. And that's just 4. Now, we could maybe mention a few other markets that it's opened up. Yeah. But we've had that in our lifetime. So the bigger questions perhaps we need to go on to are, how's it going to evolve going forward?
Absolutely.
One of the other key initiatives in the noughties in the last 20 years was the opening up of mobile money. And as soon as we looked to see how that started, we had to make sure the security was strong enough for it. We had to make sure that the systems could be regulated to satisfy not just the telecoms regulators, but also the financial regulators. But the service has had a phenomenal impact on customers globally, particularly in countries which didn't have a bank in every town or village. Particularly to people and how they got paid, particularly in terms of people who perhaps lived in countries where there was fraud. So we added in the right level of security, but also the ecosystem to really build that into a multi-billion-dollar market, completely separate to the original voice market that we grew up with.
Yeah, so that's brilliant. That actually is an amazing segue to what sort of, kind of sectors this mobile has opened up. But I want to quickly come back to what you mentioned, which is, I think, has made some significant impact on, I would say, not just in the telecom space, but in society in general. You mentioned camera, right? Camera on the phone. And you mentioned, without that, you can't even imagine social media as of now, right? Mm-hmm. So the kids of this generation, Gen Zers, they can't imagine, without a camera phone. But the way I see that is, it actually made a significant impact on the internet in general. What do I mean by that? I'm actually using the web, World Wide Web, as a synonym to internet. Technically, they are not, right? But just for the sake of it. When the web started by Sir Tim Berners-Lee in 1989, actually, the actual usage started to happen when the browser, Mozilla browser, came into picture. It was 93, 96, sometime around that. The web was read-only. The only thing I remember with those dial-up modems, the only thing that we could do, the verb was surfing or browsing. We could surf AOL, we could surf Yahoo, but it was read-only. We were only reading. Yeah. When the camera came in, the internet became write as well. Yeah. We were reading and writing into that, right? And that's why the social media boom happened. Yeah. So, that's a significant thing that happened without the mobile phone and adding the camera in there. We cannot even imagine. I'm sure something else might have come up, but right now we cannot imagine this write or internet become writable without those camera phones, right? And then many other things started to happen as well, like you can type in, post in, etc. But one of the things that you mentioned was, which is in relation to mobile money. I think if we take a few steps back, it's that inclusivity. I think you mentioned that term as well. And personally, I'm extremely passionate about this thing. And what I'm doing right now, inclusivity is the biggest driver there, right? Maybe I can share, because I said that I left a gap between accidentally turning up in telecom and what I'm doing now, right? That gap has a story of inclusivity. I'll just share quickly what does that mean by that, right? When I came into this telecom world, again, accidentally, I don't want to use that word again and again. One of the things that I realized is there are many assets there in the mobile telecom world, which probably is underutilized or the value is a bit hidden. Maybe there is an inertia there that, when you do the same thing again and again, you don't see the actual value. The gold is sitting there. And one of the asset and powerful element that I saw was the SIM. And I'll come to that inclusivity, right? Because that has enabled multiple sectors, including the mobile money, right? SIM is probably the most powerful cryptographic engine, hardware-backed, that exists.
Just to be clear for the audience, SIM is the subscriber identity module.
Absolutely.
Which traditionally has been a piece of plastic inside the mobile phone, but it's the key identifier between the network and the user. SIM now has electronic versions of that, but SIM stands for subscriber identity module.
Absolutely. And you said it nicely, right? And I keep reminding myself and everyone else, in SIM's first identity. And then, in 1991, when the SIM was first used, it was identity. And as you mentioned, Mike, earlier it used to be quite bigger plastic things, right? Then it became smaller and smaller. Now it's invisible because it's in the chip. It's the eSIM, but still.
Well, eSIM is not available in every phone yet,
yes.
but the transition has taken place over the last 34 years. So.
Absolutely. But still that I is there, right? You can put an E in the front. Maybe tomorrow you put some other thing, but I is still there, right? And that is significant, not just from technological perspective, right? It's significant from societal perspective and more importantly for the internet, right? As I was saying that in the initial days, the internet we were just browsing, right? But I think the most significant thing is the internet was never designed to identify humans. It was not designed to identify me and you. It was designed to identify computers. And that's why there were IP addresses, right? Fortunately or unfortunately, me and you do not have IP addresses yet until who knows what Mr. Elon Musk is going to do, right? Put some chips there and then there will be IP addresses. So we started to do, I would say, strange things in the internet, right? Because initially it was all fine. Whether it's me who is browsing or surfing AOL or it's you, there were no fraudsters at that time, right? Someone else, who cared? The only, important thing was to identify the returning user. That's why cookies were invented, right? But then we started to do interesting stuff in the internet. As you mentioned, social media. Before that, we started to do commerce. We started to do mobile
file
sharing as well, right? Then it did matter if it is me who is sharing that file, doing that mobile commerce, doing the social media thing, or it's you or is that fraudster. But then the internet was not designed to identify me and you. So what we did lots of, I call them, kind of stopgap, not really technologies. So let's solve the problem right now, passwords and all sorts of other. Today, we use biometrics as well, but they are not solutions. They are on top of the internet, right? And that created lots of, as you mentioned, security, compliance, etc. But then, and this is where my curiosity came in. And when I was working in the financial industry, of course, that was a major challenge. You need to identify whose account is this, who is doing the payments, right? For that, at that time, it was only user ID, password, or some sort of cryptographic stuff, right? When I came into the telecom world, and of course, it was happening earlier as well, but then it hit me that, hey, the mobile telecom works differently. If Mike calls me, so let's say in the traditional internet, if let's pick any service, let's say eBay. If someone is selling something to me, I need to pay, right? eBay will say you cannot pay. That's counterintuitive, right? So you want to pay, you take the money first, then do all the talking. But eBay will say, you cannot pay. You need to prove your Gautam first, right? So if you challenge me, there is no trust. And for obvious reason, because internet doesn't know how to identify me. This challenge could be through passwords, biometrics, OTP, doesn't matter. But then I started to think that if the same, let's say, service, if I move into the mobile telecom space, if Mike calls me, my mobile operator will not say, you cannot take that call until you prove your Gautam. That will not just be funny, that will be unacceptable. So in that case, this world works differently to the traditional internet. How do they do it? Through that SIM, right? And that is the, let's say, transformative thing that the mobile ecosystem has done. You mentioned mobile money. That's so that thing, right? And the inclusivity part is, yes, you can create, I mean, there are multiple ways to solve the, let's say, money transfusion problem or the money circulation problem. I mean, the financial industry has been probably there forever, right? You have credit cards, you have wallets, you have phone-based wallets as well. But then you mentioned security and compliance, right? You are relying on a device, mobile device, for example, to be, compliant, secure, etc. And I don't think that's inclusive, because if I can afford an iPhone 16, great. What if I cannot? Like, you're going to India, right? Lot many phones which are probably sub $20, right? Yeah. Security is the last thing. But then that's not fair in there, right? But if you are relying on, because when you're doing mobile money, identity is critical. You need to identify who this person is, and also security and compliance, right? If you are relying the mobile money or anything else on the SIM, in that case, the SIM doesn't care if it is in iPhone 16 or in the $20 phone. So the inclusivity is basically part of it. You don't need to worry about inclusivity. So that excited me. So, sorry.
Can I add a few more inclusivity points? Because
absolutely.
So I think the mobile industry we've grown up in should recognize that we've been involved with two of the biggest inventions of the last century, mobile and the internet.
Absolutely.
And when you put the two together, that is really powerful as a platform to do so much more. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the other enablers for inclusivity that we've put in place. So in the 1980s and 90s, a lot of work was done on things like credit checking.
Yeah.
If you came into a store and you wanted to buy a mobile phone, you needed to be credit checked before you got the SIM card. And I remember back in about 1989 or 88, speaking between the UK and German operators, the Germans were saying, we're very proud we've got credit checking down from 6 months to 30 days. Impressive as it sounds. So, well, we've just got it down from 30 days to 5 minutes. Now, clearly it's in seconds today, but we were already doing a lot of work to make sure we could open up the market with credit checking with the right proof of identity that was available at the time before we sold a mobile phone with a SIM card. We also, in around 1996, started to see competition playing a different payment arrangement. So moving from post-pay, a subscriber with a monthly subscription perhaps, to prepay. So your ability to reduce the identity checking a little in exchange for a prepay contract, where in effect it was pay as you go.
Yeah.
And that combination of credit checking and payment mechanisms also opened up the market. Another thing from an inclusivity point of view, we've had in the UK industry, wholesale retail markets. That's quite different to many other countries in Europe and around the world. We were way ahead of our time in terms of wholesale and retail. But that meant that we had different distribution channels, which needed to make sure the credit checking went across wholesale and retail boundaries, which made sure the wholesale billing had to work with the retail billing outlets, but also which had to make sure provisioning worked across the wholesale retail outlets. And that affected a lot of the IT systems that were needed for high street retail, before it became online retail. Now, all of that helped the inclusivity debate, not just from a financial fraud point of view, but also from an identity checking and payment point of view, as well as distribution. And what we're seeing now, here in 2025, is more interest in how do we serve better some new markets, let's say connected health or digital health. Clearly, in the digital health area, if you've got a wearable, you need to think about the privacy of patient information, the privacy of consumer data in the digital health area. It still has some way to go beyond wearables if we want to have, for example, mobile access to electronic patient records. But that journey has already started with the inclusivity work that we've done over the last 30 years. But we are going to see much more in the way of connected hospitals, connected telecare, social care solutions. I was talking only this morning to people looking at monitoring temperatures in houses and mold in houses or damp in houses to try and protect the healthcare of citizens. Now, you don't want that data to get into the wrong hands. You need a system that is end-to-end secure, but also privacy-proof. If we look at other markets beyond health, like transport, we don't want all the transport information to go to the wrong people. We might want mobile-based insurance that offers a pay-as-you-go insurance mechanism where mobile will play a part, and maybe some of the data is used by the insurance company to offer better geographic pricing for transport insurance. You might want to, in transport, think about how smart cities can manage transport because they've got a better vision of where the cars are, where the lorries are, and they can do better road planning. I don't suggest this should be Big Brother, but we need to think about transport as a sector from a privacy angle and an inclusive angle as well. I also think some areas of manufacturing, which need to become more efficient, need to think about privacy. Clearly, company information about the products they're producing should not really get outside the factory unless the factory owner is happy about that. But when we think about logistics and efficiency in a factory or in manufacturing generally, there's a lot that mobile can do. But I think it points back to the fact that we've witnessed other radio mechanisms that take us from 2G to 3G to 4G, but also the addition of Wi-Fi and the breakthrough of some of the first smartphones from 2007 has opened up new techniques in what I'd call the mobile internet industry to open up these new sectors and new markets. Now, you might say 2007 is 18 years ago. Well, initially, the smartphones were very simple. They weren't that smart, but they're getting smarter all the time, with the displays being fantastic, the memory being brilliant, but also access speeds across networks up to the megabits and even gigabits in some cases. But Wi-Fi is part of the mix. So in addition to the two big inventions of the 20th century of mobile and the internet, we now can include Wi-Fi in the mix. And my last point before handing back to you is I think the addition of satellite communications, which we're now beginning to see, is going to open up a whole new phase for the market. If we know there are some weaknesses in mobile, we are addressing them. But one of them is we can't cover everywhere very easily. The most obvious area is the sea. So how do you allow people to communicate from oil rigs or gas rigs or ships? How do you allow and help people to communicate from remote and rural areas, mountains, deep countryside? Satellite is a very useful complement to cellular and to Wi-Fi. Even if Wi-Fi may be strong indoors, satellite is really strong in the remote and rural areas. So I've been privileged to be involved in not just the last 30 years of it, but some of the innovation that's still coming. And that to me is a great privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. So you give a wide range of things from inclusivity perspective. I was just thinking, connected wearables. That's that's transforming things, right? So, for example, there is an opportunity of moving the entire, let's say, health care ecosystem from reactive to proactive, right? With this connected thing. So, with simple, let's say, sensors on these watches, on the phone, they can actually predict things before it happens, right? And that will save lives. So that's a societal change. But at the same time, I remember this thing. I think it was a while back when I was working on utility services, the smart meters, and then where there's connectivity, and then there's a positivity in there, right? So in that case, you can actually improve efficiency by not, let's say, needing someone to go and read the meters. So it collects the data, which now is quite common, right? But
particularly if it gives benefit to the consumer or the homeowner, it's not just a benefit to the energy company.
Absolutely. So the thing that I was going to mention here is there is an element of privacy and extreme security here as well. I remember one of the, I'll not mention any of the companies here. So what was happening was, because you don't want to, at least in the initial days, the users were not really quite aware of this, right? So it was kind of invisible to the user with good intention, I would say, right? That you don't want to create multiple, let's say, barriers for the user to manage it, right? So the utility meters were collecting the data, let's say electricity meters, right? And then was sending the data on a regular basis to the utility company. And what was happening was security was probably the last thing. Privacy was also the last thing in there. But if you talk about security, what was happening here is some, again, of course, bad guys tapped into that, let's say, connectivity and started to extract that data and started to sell this data in darknet. I saw it personally, right? And then another bad guy groups, or one guy or multiple guys, they use that data and then use some sort of modeling mechanism, maybe not AI, right, to profile the houses based on the pattern of, let's say, energy usage, depending on the data is concerned, right? Then they started to say, looks like there is no one living in this house at that moment of time because the energy usage is small, right? And that's kind of dangerous, right? That will attract probably another set of bad guys, burglars, etc., to be in there. I don't know if that data was actually used for that or was it created for fun. But then there is an ownership aspect of that data as well. All these sensors are generating extreme amount of data, right? This data is extremely powerful. And they can save lives, as we were talking about, right? But at the same time, who owns that data? And should they have a say when this data is shared? Who is it shared with? When is it shared? And as you rightly stated, Mike, the intention of that data to be shared needs to be either the benefit of the, let's say, entire supply chain, or at least to the consumer, because ideally they own that data. I think I don't think it's very black and white, but yeah. So there is those elements of privacy and some sort of security which may or may not happen, but there's a risk of happening, right? These bad guys are very, very clever.
Can I also just say that telecoms is a regulated industry for a good reason, and one of those is privacy.
Yeah.
It's often regulated for competition reasons, but it can be regulated for other reasons, like how do we make sure the data stays secure?
Yeah.
I certainly believe in Europe, the licensed operators are all regulated and with good intent have strong security philosophies. Where it gets to be more difficult is when you start to open up those networks to innovation and new markets. If one was to take financial services, for example, they also are strictly regulated in Europe. Again, they wouldn't want to open up too much, which would cause a security or privacy risk.
Yeah.
So the regulated industries tend to treat this area very responsibly, but novel approaches, perhaps from the less regulated industries, may not have that culture of security and discipline. And that sometimes affects the nature of innovation. We need to be careful about that, and maybe we should talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think our time is probably up today for this podcast episode. We will cover some of these subjects in more detail, particularly some of our experiences about implementation of some of these solutions around the world, and a bit more of a look forward in terms of some forecasts through to 2030.
Absolutely. And we didn't use the word that everyone really is talking about, AI. So looking forward to talk about that in the next episode. But great talking to you, Mike.
My pleasure.